His task? He had to move 600,000 troops, 3,000 artillery pieces, 90,000 horses, and 1 million tons of supplies 50 miles in 2 weeks without alerting the Germans.
We're very excited to have John share his thoughts on decision advantage. He had a long and distinguished 29-year career in the U.S. Army, including command of a battalion and brigade, retiring recently as a colonel. He's accomplished a lot in the last 29 years, so I'll just hit some highlights. First, as G5 of 18th Airborne Corps, he led the planning of the U.S. efforts supporting Ukraine. Second, he led the planning for non-combatant evacuation operations on the African continent. And 3, he's had multiple deployments over his career to places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. I've learned a lot from John on this topic, and I know you will too. We'll leave his entire bio in the show notes.
Imagine you're a commander on the battlefield where every second is a razor's edge between victory and catastrophe. One delayed decision, one misstep, and lives are lost. Missions collapse, wars shift. This is decision dominance. The power to understand, decide, and act faster than your enemy. In today's conflicts, the data moves faster than bullets. Decision dominance is survival. Nations like China and Russia are racing to master it, pouring billions into AI and real-time networks to outpace us. But the game changer in a commander's toolkit is Agentic AI, intelligence systems that process live data from ISR feeds to logistics in seconds, and then helps commanders make decisions to cut through the fog of war. To see how we can harness this, let's take a step back to 1940 when one technology redefined warfare. The French army was the world's finest, armed to the teeth, dug into fortified lines. Yet in 6 weeks, the German army crushed them. Why is that? The French clung to static defenses and slow couriers, tethered to their old tactics that had worked for years. The Germans, however, guided by their new field manual, embraced mission command, empowering leaders to act independently. They grew that mission command from the FM radio, which made it real, letting the dispersed tanks, infantry, and planes fighting distributed across the battlefield. They were able to coordinate attacks across vast fronts in real time. They turned chaos into victory, achieving decision dominance that left the French reeling. Today, Agentic AI and live data are the FM radio of our time, revolutionizing how commanders and staff process information. The Army's command doctrine, understand, visualize, describe, direct, lead, assess, unlocks this power, turning raw data into winning actions. Let me take you through 4 stories that show how these steps, paired with the right tools, build decision dominance. We'll start with understand, a lesson I learned in Ukraine in 2022. Then visualize with a story about George C. Marshall's clarity he had leading up to the Battle of Meuse-Argonne in 1918. Next, I'll talk direct, from life-saving evacuations in Sudan in 2023. And finally, assess. I'll talk a little bit about precision strike missions against ISIS in 2017. So let's dive in. First, we'll talk the understand phase, the bedrock of every plan. Karl von Clausewitz, in his 1832 masterpiece On War, called it coup d'oeil, or the commander's inner eye. This is the commander's ability to grasp the battlefield's critical elements in a glance, forged through deep study. Clausewitz warned that without this, plans fail. My old boss, General Donahue, now commander of U.S. Army Europe and Africa, would always tell the staff that his biggest lesson learned is that you have to do your own mission analysis, not accepting what was given. Too often, commanders and staffs take shortcuts, leaning on higher headquarters assumptions or stale intel, oftentimes only cutting and pasting into their own plans. That's really a trap. To craft better plans, you must know your environment inside and out, because in war, ignorance is a disaster. The best example I can give is in January 2022, I was a G5 for 18th Airborne Corps, and we were planning a non-combatant evacuation operation of Americans out of Ukraine as the Russian invasion loomed. We needed to identify airfields in Poland that we could land C-17s and set up a temporary safe haven. Poland had been a NATO ally for decades, and we should have had clear data from EUCOM, right? No, actually, details on runway and infrastructure was either old or didn't exist. Therefore, I had to start circling airfields on an old paper map like it was 1944 and not 2022. And then we had to send a leader out to recon each site, identifying whether they were feasible or not. This cost us weeks of time. when we could have used it for other things. The gap in understanding nearly derailed us, proving Clausewitz right. You can't rely on someone else's work. A commander's coup d'oeil demands firsthand knowledge, and today's agentic AI can deliver that clarity instantly, analyzing live data to reveal the battlefield truths. Once you understand, the next thing that the commander or the staff has to do is visualize. It's about stepping back, clearing the noise, and building a mental model of the mission, seeing the end state before the first move. The best example I have of this one, and it's a story I absolutely love, is in September of 1918, Colonel George C. Marshall faced this challenge during the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, a make-or-break campaign to the end of World War I. His task? He had to move 600,000 troops, 3,000 artillery pieces, 90,000 horses, and 1 million tons of supplies 50 miles in 2 weeks without alerting the Germans. Marshall had to step back. So on that day, he wandered into the French Canal, watching an elderly fisherman cast his line for a half an hour, and just had pure silence. In doing that, he experienced clarity. He saw the roads, the night marches, the French coordination. A logistical masterpiece started taking shape. So he went back to the headquarters and back to his desk, where he drafted a plan that could move the American Expeditionary Forces undetected, setting the stage for victory. Historian Edward J. Lingle calls it a turning point in his book To Conquer Hell, the Meuse-Argonne, 1918. Marshall's canal-side vision shows how focus under pressure shapes success, a skill today's tools can amplify with real-time data. Once you have a vision, the next step is to direct, turning your understanding into action. It's about issuing clear, decisive orders, adapting under pressure to make things happen. Here's the example of this one. In March 2023, again, I was the G5 at 18th Airborne Corps, and we were conducting a non-combatant evacuation of Americans out of the country of Sudan. Khartoum had the only viable airport, but it became unattainable as every country in the world was trying to move their people out of Khartoum. So we needed to get the Americans out fast. So for days and days, I sat thinking about this problem, and I hit a dead end, basically. Then I had a memory which sparked. I had a really good friend who always loved the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles and would tell the story about Steve Martin yelling, "Those aren't pillows," as John Candy and him shared a bed one night after an awkward moment. That inspired me. Planes were out, but what about trains, buses, boats? So I went back to the headquarters and I called the contracting team and said, "Can we get any tickets on trains from Khartoum to the port? Can we charter buses? And what boats are available that we could find to get people out?" In the end, those became more feasible than trying to get out of the airport. We secured a bus for nonstop runs from Khartoum to the port, and then we had boats move Americans to safety in Saudi Arabia. It wasn't pretty, but we saved hundreds of lives, and we did it pretty fast. So directing means seizing inspiration and acting fast today. And again, agentic AI could query live transportation data in seconds, turning sparks into solutions. Finally is the assess part. This phase that ensures plans deliver. It's not a one-off, it's a relentless cycle of evaluating actions, spotting gaps, and improving, even when no one's complaining. So in 2017, I was a commander of a HIMARS battalion, and we were supporting operations against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. I learned this lesson the hard way. Our Gimler's rockets, which are surgical weapons, were targeting ISIS ammo caches, VBID factories, and leaders, but in urban stronghold. Precision was everything, and I pushed my team to analyze every single battle damage assessment for every strike. And what we did is we found a problem. Rockets from one area were off by 10 meters. Close enough for effects, but not to a standard that mattered. 10 meters in a city could be catastrophic. Digging deeper, what we discovered was that there was a flaw in the AFATAD system, which is the field artillery system that computes the firing data. It automatically defaults to a thing called height above ellipsoid instead of the Army's mean sea level, which is the standard measurement on a HIMARS launcher. So we were able to fix that, and our strikes began to hit dead on again. Now, no one had complained, but we knew we could do better. And the assessments caught a silent error, proving its power. Today, agentic AI can analyze live BDA feeds instantly, ensuring precision in chaotic battle spaces. These stories, Ukraine, Marshall, Sudan, ISIS, show how understand, visualize, direct, and assess build decision dominance. Agentic AI and live data are the new tools in a commander's toolkit. processing information at unprecedented speed to outpace an adversary. One example is Exia Labs, whose AI-driven solutions, tested with units like the 101st Airborne, are slashing planning time and empowering warfighters to win. In a $140 billion defense tech market, tools like these are redefining warfare, ensuring commanders understand deeply, visualize clearly, direct decisively, and assess relentlessly. Just as the Germans with their FM radio turned the tide in 1940, our agentic AI is our path to victory today. Let's seize it.